All right, welcome back. So far in this series, we spent a ton of time digging into the history of a text, how it came to be, how it was read. But now, we're flipping the script and asking a completely new question. Let's dive in.
And here it is, the big question for today. How can a collection of ancient writings actually become the architecture for a civilization? I mean, how does it move off the page and get baked into our institutions, our laws, and even the very way we think about the world?
So, just as a quick rewind, remember where we've been. We started with the Bible's core narrative. Then we looked at how those stories were gathered into a canon. And finally, we followed the long, winding road of how people have interpreted it. It's all been about the text itself.
But today, we're making a huge pivot. We're shifting from the story of the text to the story of its impact. We're not just asking what the Bible says anymore. We're asking, what did it do? How did these ideas actually get out into the world and get built into the very structures of society?
So, here's our game plan. First, we'll explore this idea of a conceptual blueprint. Then, we'll see how that blueprint was used to build some of the pillars of modernity. After that, and this is really important, we have to grapple with its complicated legacy. And finally, we'll talk about why this enduring architecture still matters today.
Okay, so this is the absolute key. The Bible wasn't like some literal instruction manual for building a country. It's not IKEA furniture. A better way to think about it is as a conceptual blueprint. It offered a set of really powerful, foundational ideas that thinkers, leaders, and revolutionaries drew on for centuries.
So what's in this blueprint? Well, one of the most radical ideas is that human beings are made in the image of God. Now let's just set the theology aside for a second and think about what this concept does. It means every single person has a built-in, intrinsic value, a value that doesn't come from your job, your wealth, or your social status. It's just there.
And an ideal like that doesn't just appear fully formed. It went on this incredible journey. You can trace it from this biblical concept to centuries of debate by medieval theologians, then it gets picked up and reinterpreted by Enlightenment thinkers, and eventually it gets secularized into the modern language of universal human rights. It's a long, winding process, not a sudden jump.
Now let's look at another core idea from this blueprint, this one about power and authority. Throughout history, you see one model pop up again and again: absolute power. Basically, the law is whatever the king or the emperor says it is. But the biblical tradition introduced a truly radical alternative: the idea that everyone, and yes, that includes the king, is under a higher law.
And this was often talked about using the idea of a covenant or a pact. And this wasn't just a religious concept. It had huge political implications. It meant that no ruler's power could be absolute. There was a standard of justice, a moral framework that stood above any person. And that, right there, is a powerful tool for challenging tyranny.
Okay, so we've got these two game-changing concepts from the blueprint: this idea of universal human dignity and the idea of limited authority. So how did these abstract ideas get turned into the actual scaffolding for modern society? Let's take a look.
And the influence here is just massive. It's not in just one little area. You can see these ideas rippling out, shaping everything from legal codes to political theories, from art and language to how we argue about economics. We could do a whole explainer on each of these. But for now, let's just zoom in on one to see how it works: education.
I mean, just think about it for a second. What happens when a society puts a single, central, authoritative text right at its core? It creates this massive, powerful incentive for people to learn how to read. For centuries, the main driver for literacy wasn't commerce. It was the desire to read and understand the Bible for yourself. And what's really fascinating is how this drive to study eventually gave birth to an entire institution. The practice of digging deep into this one text, developing these formal methods for argument and debate, well, that became the intellectual engine for what we now call the university. The methods of study pioneered there spread out into pretty much every other field you can imagine.
Okay, now we need to get real here. This was not a simple one-way street where a book just created the world. Not at all. The Bible's influence is part of a much bigger, much messier story. Its legacy is all about interaction, and sometimes deep, deep contradiction.
You see, this biblical blueprint didn't exist in a vacuum. Its ideas were in a constant conversation and sometimes a fight with other great traditions. Ideas about law and covenant bumped up against the super sophisticated legal system of the Roman Empire. The concept of human dignity was debated with and shaped by Greek philosophy. It was a dialogue, not a monologue. And this gets to the very heart of the complicated legacy. We have to be honest here. The very same text has been used to justify oppression and legitimize some of the worst abuses of power in history. But it has also been the fuel for revolutions, for the abolitionist movement, and for countless struggles for social justice. It's a powerful tool that has been used for completely opposite ends.
So after all that, what are we supposed to make of this? Let's go back to our architecture metaphor. Why does digging into this ancient blueprint still matter for us, right here, right now?
Well, here's the bottom line. So many of the core assumptions of our modern world, things we take for granted about human rights, justice, the limits of power, they are built on this ancient architecture. They're part of our cultural DNA. And if you really want to understand the world we live in, you have to be able to see the ideas that built it, especially the ones that have become so familiar, they're practically invisible.
So I'll leave you with this to think about. If our civilization really is like a building, constructed layer by layer over centuries, it's worth asking, which parts of that original biblical blueprint are still the load-bearing walls holding everything up? And which parts have we made a conscious choice to tear down and renovate? The answer to that tells us an awful lot about who we were and who we're trying to become.